You guys, today I'll be harvesting some stingy nettle roots. I thought I would take you guys along on this journey. Now, I have done a previous episode on how to harvest the leaves of stingy nettles for tea or to eat. If you guys are interested on how to do that, be sure to check out that video. It's got quite a few views, and so I'm really happy to see that you guys are enjoying episodes like these about health and how to, utilize plants for your health. So in that video, I talked about the health benefits of it, and I shot it during the late winter or early spring when the weather started to warm up a bit. That's when you see the stingy nettles start, germinating and growing up as plants again, because they do die back in the winter when it gets cold. You either find these sometimes, growing wild in your garden, or you intentionally plant them. Or if you go on hikes, like say in places like in the East Coast, they find them easily in a lot of the hiking trails or under the trees. When you practice traditional Chinese medicine, you'll know that there is a difference as to when you harvest them, what time of the season of its growing season, or which part of the plant. There are different benefits in them. So when it comes to stingy nettles, the leaves are just super green during its time of, growing during the warm season, and so these younger leaves would be more tender, easier to eat, so you can put them in juices and smoothies. You can even, if you want a really nice green full of chlorophyll kind of a tea, you can use those younger leaves. And then at the end of the season, where it's getting colder, I think it dipped down to 33 degrees Fahrenheit here last night, so the stingy nettles are still hanging on, but they're not super green like the prime time of its life. So I am going to be picking out some of these leaves for tea, and then the roots especially. Stingy nettle leaves, I've seen that studies have shown they're actually really helpful for breast cancer, even for allergies. So I think at the if you have seasonal allergies, things like that, aside from eating your local sourced honey, or locally sourced raw honey, so that you can get yourself more immune or get used to the pollen all around you. But also for allergy, you can use stingy nettle leaves. Now when it comes to stingy nettle roots, it's actually really helpful for enlarged prostate, especially for men. You definitely want to look into nourishing that part of your organ, and also very helpful for arthritis. So nevertheless, let's get started, and I'll show you how I harvest them, because they're actually really tough. Especially the more mature leaves, that's when the buildup of the acid and the other chemicals that really sting you, and those sting would last for a while. For me, a strong sting, meaning harvesting a mature plant, that sting would last for days for me. I'm just more on the sensitive side than other people. But if you pick the younger leaves, they won't sting you as much. You can see that episode to find out how I harvest the younger leaves. But with the older ones, got to be more careful. Ideally, you'd want really thick gloves to work with, but I'm not home right now, so I can't get to those gloves. What I have right here, I'm just going to work with what I got, is just a pair of surgical or just gloves. They're pretty thin. I can double these up if I want to, but I'm just gonna put these on. And another thing is, be sure that you are wearing long sleeves and pants so that you won't get stung. Just be careful when you're working through harvesting them. The first thing I'm going to be doing is to minimize the stinging by getting the leaves out of the way, since there are some leaves here that are still usable. So when it gets tough like this during the older stage of its life, I either would juice them, because of the texture. Leaves are not as delicate and easy to eat. Also, they're just a little more strong on the sting. So juicing would be the best way to ingest them raw at this stage. Or you can dehydrate them, dry them for tea, because for tea you don't really care about so much of the texture. You're just extracting the nutrients and drinking it, right? I think I'm just going to carefully work through wearing this glove. This is going to be, you know, a bit time consuming, but to me it's pretty much therapy, you know, in the garden here. The more love, the more time you give it, the more nice the results would be, depending on how picky you are, you know, with the leaves. So like for me, I can just cut away the bad leaves here and use them for compost tea. Anyway, I can do this later. I'm just going to be making doing a quick job harvesting here. Let's do that first. Got some Genera growing over here because the Genera Procumbens longevity spinach is the next bed to this. I'm not cutting it all the way down. I'm saving a little bit of stem so it's easier for me to, you know, have some like something to work with so that I can pull up the roots easier later. Usually I'll tell you this, that the newer growth happens on the top section, so that's actually the best part at this point of the plants, is to save the top portions for tea or for juicing. This. These leaves, the dried leaves, are really great to use in your compost bin too. The stingy, actually, once it dries up, you're not really going to get that stingy. You might get stabbed from the really old, you know, what do you call these, like spines that are really thick, but there is no more chemicals or acid that would penetrate through your skin when the plants are dried, or if you've cooked them for like, you know, 5 or 10 minutes, there will be no more stingy. Or if you have harvested them and kind of let it just sit out for a couple of hours, the stinging will lessen as well. As I'm harvesting, some of the seeds that are still on here are going to fall and get everywhere in this area, and so once spring comes, it's gonna come back up. Here are some I just harvested. There are probably about the same amount that's left on the bed, but I'm just going to be finishing up with these first. And usually I would have to sort this out and pick out the younger leaves to save them for tea and for juicing, and the rest would go in the compost or making compost tea. Alright, stinging nettles have these rhizomes, which is basically like underground stems, so they would kind of send out and trail and eventually spread, and like one plant can eventually spread and cover a whole like large area. When you're able to dig up the roots, wash it up really well, scrub it, use a toothbrush or some sort of a brush to kind of scrub off all the dirt all around. And then you can just kind of like wait for it to dry a little bit, or dab it dry with a towel. And I highly recommend that you chop them up while the roots are still fresh. And if it's too hard to chop up, you can use some pruning shears and cut them to smaller pieces. I'm not sure if your food processor would be able to blend them up just to get them kind of coarse, kind of like how would you find them as tea, so it's easier for you to make tea. The more surface space would be exposed, the more faster and the more the nutrients would leach out when you're making tea. So do it while the stems are, even though they're tough, but they're still fresh. Once you dry them, they're basically like, you know, like wood. It's going to be really hard for you to cut them down to size by then. After harvesting these, I left them out for about 3 or 4 hours. Then I went back and started picking out these leaves, you know, separating the ones for tea and for compost. I was working without gloves on and I didn't have any issues. It's just that I've been, you know, I'm working in the garden now, so I got gloves on again. But yeah, the needles, or what do you call these spines, they're not really stingy anymore, but I was handling them carefully, like just very light with gentle pressure. I wasn't like grabbing them or anything. These are the nice fresh leaves that I just washed, and just basically going to let them dry. Since there's not a whole lot of this tea, what I can do is, if I have a colander that's more like flat, I can lay them all out after I wash it. I can just lay them in a thin layer and let them dry on their own, and once in a while, of course, kind of give them a little toss and turn to make sure that there's good air circulation. But if you are drying them in a colander, you look, I mean, there's air circulation all around anyway, but I just want to get them to dry more evenly, and definitely let them dry in the shade. Or if you have a dehydrator, that's even better. You just pop these in the dehydrator. But yeah, if you guys want to find out another way of how you harvest these to make tea, such as even hanging them dry, go check out my other video on stingy nettle teas. The way that you can tell your tea is ready to package is that it is fully dry, and to make sure that it is fully dried, let's just say if you were to dry them using a dehydrator, no matter how low of a setting you give it, there is usually probably a little bit of warmth from, you know, drying. So I would give it at least half hour to an hour just to make sure everything is cooled down and that it is fully dry before you package them, because when you leave them in a sealed tight container with a little bit of warmth in there, it might create some moisture and that would cause mold. So just a little heads up. Finally, the last thing is that the leaves that are not looking so good, I'm just going to soak them in a bucket. And this is what I usually do, is in a 5-gallon bucket to make compost tea. If you want to step up with, you know, the potency of this tea, the strength of it, you can even brew the tea. Now, I am going to warn you that this tea for the garden is going to be stinky, not just from the stingy nettle, but it is like stinky. So usually I would put a cap over it, but not totally make it breathable though. So I just kind of gently place a lid over the bucket, just kind of pushing it down. Want to crank up the notch, make it more potent. You can actually put a bubbler inside and actually brew the tea. So I would leave this pot in a more filtered light or indirect sun so that direct sunlight would not kill the good bacteria. I would like to strain this out and just use the water to water the garden, water the leafy greens, because this is high in nitrogen. And ideally, because it's sort of a stinky kind of a solution, I would prefer to do it maybe later in the evening, so I'm no longer in the garden enjoying the plants. But that's about it. You don't have to change the water or anything. It's basically just going to, you know, the leaves are just going to sit in the water. Once in a while, you can come out each day and give it a stir just so it gets incorporated really evenly so that all the nutrients can get extracted. Now, how would you know this pot is finished fermenting? Well, it'll start stinking really badly. But basically, you'll see everything is kind of soggy and just rotting in there. It's really smelly. That's when you know. You can either just dump the whole thing in the garden, or you can be a little more clean and just compost after you strain out and use the water for the garden, and then you can compost the rest of the rotting, you know, plant matter. I usually just do straight on watering with the solution. I don't dilute it with any water. You can if you want to, but because this was created with fully organic materials, I find that the plants don't get burned or anything like that. If you do water your plants on a regular basis making this solution, then you can probably dilute it with some water. But I usually just put even 3 times this amount if I have abundance of nettles that are growing through the season, in the warm season. And I would make this and water the plants maybe you know, anything between 1 to 3 times a month. So this is a really nice free fertilizer that you can use and make right at home. Just keep in mind that it is kind of stinky and stinging. When this is ready to use, everything is rotted already, so you don't have to worry about the seeds just germinating in random spots. I don't usually see that problem even when I just pour the entire thing, you know, without straining over the plants. But of course, to get a much cleaner process, you'd want to strain this. It's getting cold out here. It is time to move the work indoors. So thank you all so much for joining me out here today. If you guys have any questions, comments, or let me know if you guys have experience using or eating stingy nettles, I'd love to know. And yeah, like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more videos. And you can follow me on Facebook or Instagram, where I do some instant updates of my life that you don't get to see on this channel. If you would like to support my work, I really would appreciate it. Please go visit my website at wendyland.com. I'll see you right back here in the next video. Stay safe and warm. Bye guys.